Good morning, Coldwell Banker, George Realty. It's nice to see you all here. We have Peter Cam in the room here, so feel free to ask questions as we go along. The lease agreement is important because the residential lease agreement, because it's another profit center for you, and you get to know the owners of the properties and, perhaps have a listing later, or the tenant could become your buyer. So we're going to share the screen and I'm going to go over the parts that I think are important. And here we go. Okay, so we're going to start out with the residential lease or month-to-month rental agreement. I didn't populate for my training the agency disclosure, but regardless if this is a year or longer, because the lease says if it's a year or longer, have an agency. Even if it's just under a year or 6 months, please do the agency disclosure. We're going to require it. Okay, so I just didn't populate it because I don't think we need to go over that particular form today. We're going to focus on the lease agreement and how to get paid for commission on a residential lease agreement. So you're going to fill out the top, and I'm going to highlight some areas that I've seen missed or that maybe people don't realize the importance of. Right here, we need to name the occupants. Who can occupy this premises? It may be John and Mary Doe and 2 minor children. So we don't really need the names of minors. But at any rate, if it's anybody 18 or above that will be occupying this premises, please make sure they're named here. Very important to have the names of the occupants for the residents, okay?
And it's 18 years and above, right?
18 and above need to be named. Anything below, you can say minor, minor person or child, okay? The following personal property will be maintained and included. So if it's a refrigerator, stove, dishwasher, type that in here. So, and then I'll show you in paragraph 11 how it says that it's not warranted. So if you are leaving personal property there for their use, make sure that it is included there and that it remains so that it remains with the property too. Okay.
Does that include like townhomes that already sometimes they'll buy brand new appliances for that townhome and be like, okay, that's
anything that you're leaving. And the reason why it's important is because even if, let's say if it's an attached microwave, the owner may not want to keep repairing the microwave that you keep breaking. So, if a tenant keeps breaking something, I'm sure that they'll repair it a couple of times, but there's a no warranty clause in this agreement. And that's the reason I think it's important to include it all, because we don't want to keep repairing something. So you're going to have the term, the commencement date here. Now you have 2 choices on this agreement. You can either go month to month, you need to check A or B, or you can do a lease. And then if that's the case, then you're going to put a termination date. So if this is a lease, go ahead and put the termination date. I usually put it at 8 p.m. or something like that here, or, so whatever your choice is, or the landlord's choice, or excuse me, housing provider. So down here in section 3, you're going to put in the rent amount that they will be paying for the agreement. The rent is payable in advance on the 1st, or if you want to specify a different day, I usually just let it flow to the 1st. But if the housing provider has a different day in mind, you can insert that here. Okay. So the payment, the rent shall be paid by, of course, they have a box for wire transfer. If that's the housing provider's choice, you can check that. Make sure you're communicating with the housing provider. You can check personal check, cashier's check, made payable to, or wire transfer payment goes to here. Now they also have a Venmo will not be accepted, or PayPal. That's how it defaults, which I think is good. So in order to make those acceptable, you need to check the box. Okay, so these are all discussions with the property owner. Rent shall be delivered to, who's the name on the personal check, cashier's check, phone number, and their address, very important information. Or if checked, maybe it's ran, this property is managed by property management. They may have an office that you can personally deliver to if you want, and you put the times they're open and the days. If any payment from the tenant is returned for non-sufficient funds, or a tenant stops payment, the housing provider may in writing require that the tenant pay rent in cash for 3 months and all future rent be paid by. I prefer a cashier's check over a money order for a lot of reasons, but Peter could probably explain that better. Do you think a cashier's check is better?
Yeah,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah,
Automatically taken, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's guaranteed by the bank.
right. And so a money order, I really would say we should ask for a cashier's check, discuss that with the property owner. And if there is any rental payments received by the housing provider, any past due, they shall apply that amount to the past due amounts first. Okay, so they will take care of past due amounts, and then they'll apply the remaining balance to the rent. So, you know, they need to make sure how much they need to clear up. So tenants for the security deposit, so the tenant agrees to pay, you insert the amount here. It's usually equal to the 1 month's rent. That's the new law. Now, I like this form. There's a CAR form SDDA I'll show you at the end that explains the security deposits. And it says right here that the maximum amount of the security deposit paid on or before initial occupancy cannot exceed 1 month's rent.
that's good.
So unless an exception applies. So I think the CAR form SDD is a nice form to populate with your lease because it is explaining the security deposit, and I'll show you at the end, or, you know, if there are any exceptions to that, okay? So it's a great form to have everybody sign. I really actually like this form once I started looking at it. So the security deposit shall, in addition to any advance payment of the first month's rent. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up here. I'm sorry, this is the one I wanted to go over. Security deposit, we want to check that it will be transferred and held by the owner of the premises. We don't hold any funds in the brokerage. So you always want to make sure on 4C, you're checking that you're transferring it to the owner of the premises. Okay, so
Yeah, that's a very important thing to check because we don't want to be responsible for the trust fund. We don't have a trust fund account in our brokerage.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's very important that you check the box and you said the transfer the fund to the owner's account.
Yeah, because I think in the older days, way back, we used to be logging in and out of trust accounts. Those days are gone. We don't do that anymore on anything.
Too much trouble.
Yeah.
So, liable for
Yeah.
lawsuit.
So, yeah, definitely.
So any or all portion of the security deposit may be used by the housing provider to cure defaults or repair damage, excluding ordinary wear and tear. And they have big and bolded that the security deposit shall not be used by tenant in lieu of payment of last month's rent. So we want to retain the security deposit for, you know, the landlord to do their final walkthrough, make sure everything's good when the tenant's turning over. And the security deposit will not be returned until all tenants have vacated the premises and returned all keys. Okay, so move-in costs received and due. So here, again, if I'm typing this up and talking to the housing provider, I'm going to require a cashier's check. But of course, I'm going to ask the housing provider. I think it's important to come in on the first month's rent and the security deposit with a cashier's check. So that's what I'm always going to check. But again, that's up to the housing provider. You're going to put what rent that cashier's check is covering. The dates go here, the total due date, and then payable to. Important to put the payable to. Now, you're not going to have a payment received typed up automatically. Once the housing provider receives that, because you're going to take the lease signed by the tenant to the housing provider, they can insert a date in that they've received the check. When I get a cashier's check from a tenant, I always make a copy of that cashier's check and I hand it back to them that we have received it and will provide it to the housing provider. Okay. So this is just what's due, the security deposit and the first month's rent. Now, if you start putting other figures in here, remember that has to only total the equivalent of 1 month. So if you want to put $200 here for keys and $200 for garage door opener, you need to reduce this by that $400 and not exceed the first month's rent for security deposit. Okay?
Even for the pets.
Even for pets.
Yeah, the pets, if you charge extra for the pets, you have to get the maximum, not more than 1 month.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think some people think they can get more, but on other line items, you can't.
Right.
It's very,
So in other words, they try to say, okay, security deposit, for keys, 200,
And then for pet deposit, another
cash
100.
deposit,
You can't do
another
that.
100, okay,
Yeah, so the maximum is 1 month.
1 month.
That doesn't matter what you classify as, pet or keys or any other things.
So I think on 6, for the late charge, it's very important to have a discussion with the owner of the property. So this is an important clause right here, and we don't want to miss filling it out. Tenant is, if they have not paid within 5 calendar days, it's not business days, calendar days after the due date, or if a check is returned, the tenant shall pay to the housing provider an additional sum, or you can put a percent in there. So make sure that they can either do a flat fee or they can put a percent in there. Okay, so make sure that you're discussing that with them. Some housing providers already have something in mind, and you'll see right here that they get $35 for an NSF fee. So do you have any recommendation on the percent that they should charge for a late fee?
6%, normal.
Okay, 6% is Peter's recommendation for that late fee charge of the rental amount, 6% here, okay? And then the housing provider does agree that these above charges are reasonable and fair, and it's right here in B. So 7, for the parking, it's really important to fill this out. We don't want any parking wars. So it's either A, the parking is permitted as follows. They may have a detached garage or something like that, or a garage, or they may have just a carport that has a number on it, but make sure that you're filling it out. And on A, the right to parking is or is not included in the rent charge. So generally it's going to be included. So you want to check is, but again, it's something you have to discuss with the housing provider and make sure. Or B, you may be in a tight area where there is no parking on the premises. Then you're going to need to check B, that there's no parking on the real property. So that could be downtown LA, maybe places that are really congested, there might not be parking. So make sure that you don't leave this blank. Check either or. I think storage is important too. I generally on these, I'm going to check B, except for tenants' personal property contained entirely within the premises. Storage is not permitted on the premises. Generally about 90% of the leases that we've done, we're going to be checking B on residential. Because we don't want a bunch of, if you've driven by some places, I've seen where the porch is, oh man, like there's one on Garfield, totally packed up with stuff. So I always check B because we want the storage to be contained within the unit. Okay. So tenant agrees to pay for all of the utilities and the following charges. So here I will always write internet, Wi-Fi, if desired, because I want to clue them in that the housing provider is not providing you that. That's your charge. If you want it, you go get it and, pay for it. And then they have an exception. Maybe here, maybe the housing provider is going to pay for trash collection or water, okay? Or you can check this box that they're going to pay utilities as agreed in a separate addendum that you're going to attach, okay? And the housing provider is responsible. They're only responsible for installing and maintaining one usable telephone jack and one telephone line to the premises. So there is a responsibility there to have one working telephone line / jack. Okay. Now, if there is water submeters or any submeters, check the box and then you're going to grab the form that goes with that. For the water submeters is the one we see most on leasing. Then you would attach the WSM. So if there's a water submeter, these are questions you're going to be asking the property owner. Okay. And then the condition of the premises, I think it's good to walk it before you let them in. It's just so much better to do the move-in form, the MII. So for us, we're generally going to check A, that the tenant acknowledges the condition of the items contained in the attachment car form MII. So you can go with them and walk them through, let them point out anything. They can take pictures that you can attach to that MII, but I like it done prior to them taking possession because then it was how it was turned over before anybody was in there. Okay. So 11's important too because you want to make sure you're filling in the appropriate boxes. So the housing, if you look here at B, the housing provider, tenant, or HOA waters the garden, landscaping, trees, and shrubs. So, it may be on auto sprinkler, things like that, but you need to check who's responsible for this because nobody's going to know, when they first move in unless you check it. And there's a maintenance clause here for the landscaping. So a lot of your housing providers are probably going to have a gardener, but if not, you need to be checking who's going to be maintaining the landscaping, trees, and shrubs. Generally, I'm seeing that it is the housing provider and they will have a gardener that goes over, but make sure you're not leaving these blank because we don't want any confusion on who's doing what on the property. And then housing provider or tenant shall maintain. What I've put here before is there was a balcony on the first level attached, like when you walk in, there's a little, not balcony, excuse me, patio. The gardener could not get to the patio, right? Because it's a locked patio. So if there's things like that the tenant needs to maintain and, kept swept up and clean, or maybe there's a little shrubbery, you want to outline that here so that they understand what the housing provider expects in the maintenance of that area, okay? Periodic pest control. Housing provider or tenant shall pay for periodic pest control. That's something you need to talk to the housing provider about. Usually, I don't know what everybody else's experience is here. We don't have on a lot of the residential units that they're doing periodic. They may do it once it's vacated and turn it over, but I haven't seen, to be fair, when they're going in every 6 months or something. But that's something you need to discuss with the housing provider. So here's where I was telling you if the appliances or anything that you're leaving, the following items, you need to retype what you're leaving in the premises that are personal property are provided without warranty. Very important. And housing provider will not repair, or replace them. So you need to outline again what you're leaving there. Because I've seen, oh gosh, what was it? A refrigerator that kept being broken and they kept calling for repair. So, you know, you need to be very thoughtful in what you put here and make sure you're covering, because you want to have that no warranty clause for those items. And of course, unless the housing provider wants to warranty them, but normally not.
They know, yeah, okay, they usually don't.
Neighborhood conditions. The tenant can go ahead and check the neighborhood themselves, listen for noise, all of that stuff. So they can do that prior to signing the lease, you know, go ahead and check the neighborhood out for themselves. And it's just giving them a clause about that. And animals, unless otherwise permitted by the civil code, no animal shall be kept on or about the premises without the housing provider's prior written consent. Or you can also check except as agreed to in the attached animal terms and condition addendum. So this is already built in for you. So unless they do have an animal, you'll be checking this box. This is a non-smoking contract unless you make it a smoking contract. So here on 14C, no smoking of any substance allowed on the premises or common areas. So unless you make it a smoking agreement, it's always non-smoking as default, unless you check this box right here where my arrow is, and then you allow them to smoke whatever. But this is a non-smoking contract. I know that some housing providers will ask that, are they going to be smoking? You can point them to this clause, okay? Rules and regulations. So if there's any rules and regulations that the housing provider has, then they can provide that to them. Generally, on a smaller housing provider, they probably don't have a set typed up rules and regulations, but they still need to follow, you know, the terms of the agreement. And if the housing provider posts any rules and regulations, they need to be followed, lawful rules and regulations, okay? So condominium or planned unit development, if that's the case, if you're renting in one of those, this box needs to be checked. And you need to check one here. The housing provider will provide the tenant with a copy of the HOA rules within how many days or on what date? Or the tenant has already been provided with and acknowledges a copy of the HOA rules. I think when you're having this signed, it's best to have a copy of the HOA rules for tenants along with the agreement so they can initial it. Yeah, because it's only fair to let them know about the rules, okay? So alterations and repairs, you need to have the housing provider's permission to make any alterations or improvements or repairs to the property. Okay, keys and lock is important here because I always like to check, or I put the check mark here. I put the date of commencement. I don't want to give it to them early. And there's reasons, because I want to make sure that we have insurance and all of that. And I'll show you down here. So here I'm always putting the start date. I really don't want to give it to them early unless the housing provider says, give it to them early, okay?
I'm sorry, start date of the contract?
The commencement lease date, like 11/1/24, whenever it's going to start. I usually just put that here. And then we check whatever we're giving them, okay? Now 18B, I should have highlighted it on my copy, but extremely important, very important not to miss this. Tenant acknowledges that locks to the premises have or have not been rekeyed. This is put a star by it. Don't miss checking that. You need to let them know, okay? So that's put a star by that as well. So the entry, the housing provider, property management company will give a 24-hour notice unless it's an inspection, unless they're coming in. I know where my daughter lives, they do an annual inspection. The owner actually comes in and then they give her a 48-hour notice where they're just checking and making sure everything's looking nice in the unit. So if it's for that type of inspection, then they give a 48-hour notice. If it's a 24-hour notice for any other things, then that's sufficient, okay? So right here on 19C, if this box is checked, the tenant authorizes the use of a lockbox to allow entry to the premise. It defaults that it's not allowed unless you check it. It's probably good to let it default to not be allowed. Peter, did you have anything to add?
About what?
Anything on this so far? Anything more? Okay, all right.
Speak up when I.
Okay. So 23 is important because, you know, if you are going into a situation with a roommate or a couple of roommates, you're responsible for the entire rent. So if there is more than one tenant, each one shall be individually responsible for the performance of all obligations of tenant under this agreement. So it's important to note that if you're going in with roommates, make sure you know them well and, you know.
Even if that's the case too, so.
So tenant's obligation upon vacating the premises, the tenant's gonna give back all the keys and opening devices and anything like that. But I want to point something out in this paragraph, C. So the tenant can request a pre-move out inspection. So that would be that the tenant would be there with who's ever doing the inspection. It could be the property manager or the owner. After giving and receiving notice of their intent to move, they can request that they come in and inspect the unit with them. And that gives the tenant some time, if the ownership is pointing out some things that need to be corrected, then it gives the tenant time to make those corrections. I think this is a good idea. So, you know, that's up to the tenant because they're the ones that can request that right to a pre-move out inspection. Okay.
Now, for comments on the return of the security deposit, you have 20 days to return.
Oh, yeah.
After all the deduction, you have to give them a list of deductions and return the deposit, security deposit to the tenant within 20 days after they vacate the properties.
Can they just make a list or do they need to provide receipts or anything? It's just a list, right?
Just a list.
Oh, okay. So just a list. Yeah.
Just a thing that that they repair or is out of the ordinary, and deduct it from the security deposit and return the rest to the tenant within 20 days.
Okay. So this is the insurance. You have to check 29C. You can talk to the housing provider about this. I like that they have their own insurance. I think it's really important, right, Peter? Because
Yes.
Liability. How does that
Also,
work?
Even for the damage to the personal belongings.
Yes.
At least they should have a renter's insurance, which is very reasonable, and less than $100 you can have a policy like that, and it's really a peace of mind.
There's a lot of that stuff, yeah.
tenants.
If someone breaks in and
Yeah.
steal your stuff.
Right, taking your stuff. So this is very important that you tell the tenants that this is their responsibility. Although the landlord has their own liability insurance and fire insurance, but that doesn't cover the personal properties of the tenants. Okay.
Okay. Yes, that's what I was wondering about the homeowner's liability insurance. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't cover the tenants' belongings. So it's recommended that the tenants obtain their own renter's insurance.
So you can make this a requirement of the contract by checking this box, which you need to talk to the housing provider, but I think you heard Peter, it's important. So I would recommend that you show them that, the housing provider, and discuss that with them.
Yeah, I just had an incident where my tenants, when my properties got broken in, And when the tenants lost their computers, the personal items, and they said, well, does the insurance cover it? I said, no, because normally it won't cover the tenants' belongings, personal belongings. And they were advised to get their own, but they didn't. So.
Oh,
what can I
okay.
do?
So in that situation, your insurance company only covered wherever damage that caused from the
Exactly.
property,
Yeah,
not
to the
personal
public.
damage from the tenant.
That's right, that's right.
Okay, so I think paragraph 30 is important because I have seen a portable washing machine work in my daughter's dorm and it spits water. So for number 30, this is, I always check that they're not allowed. Tenant shall not use on the premises a portable dishwasher, those will spit water, or a portable washing machine. And then I will further state that they are not allowed to have water beds. Reason why is if you look at the top of 30, it says that they can have a water bed. The tenant shall not have a water bed unless they obtain waterbed insurance policy. Well, most of the housing providers that I'm working with, they don't care. They don't want that waterbed in there. So make sure that you understand that and you say no waterbed to override what it says, because you don't want them to give you a policy on a waterbed if the housing provider does not want a waterbed. Okay, so this is an important, I know it looks benign, but to me it's really important because especially that washing machine thing, it spits water everywhere. Okay.
I used to have a waterbed and it popped.
Oh,
I
wow.
was a teenager and it popped, and yeah,
It's a mess.
it's a mess.
Yeah, especially you're on a second story and you're gonna damage a lot. So I really don't like that they gave them an unless clause in there to get insurance on it. I think it's safer for the property owner to not allow a waterbed, but that is their decision. So make sure that this notice area is filled out, the housing provider. This is the mailing address and all that, and for the tenant. Okay, and the tenant, they're saying that they warrant that all the statements on their application were accurate. And then it also says that it requires all occupants 18 years or older to provide their own application. Mediation is built into the contract here. So the tenant and the housing provider agree to mediate claims involving, and it even includes the listing agent, leasing agent, or property manager. I just wanted to point that out quickly. Number 36.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay,
I mean,
go
I have
ahead.
comments, regarding the mediation and arbitration. This only applies to the housing provider and the tenant. It doesn't apply to the brokers. And also, it doesn't apply to the UD, and also mechanics liens and probates and small claims court or bankruptcy.
Oh,
Okay, so those are excluded. And also it's questionable whether you should choose mediation and arbitration before you initiate the lawsuit, because if you choose the mediation and the arbitration, you have to go through that before you can sue them in small claims court or any superior court. And sometimes it's a deterrent, it's a nuisance to have that kind of restriction. Because the arbitration can take time. It's much longer than the small claims, and also it's much more expensive than the small claims, which usually for residential dispute is less than 12,500, which is the limit of the small claims court. So with this residential at least the dispute, usually it's sufficient to go to small claims court, and it's much more efficient and a lot less expensive. So if you don't want to agree to mediation and arbitration, it's okay.
so this is built in. So if they want to strike the mediation
Yeah.
clause and initial it, they're going to need to do that.
Right.
Both parties, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
A mediation is okay if you choose just a mediation, but never agree to arbitration.
Oh, okay.
Mediation is a non-binding. and it's usually pretty
Retired
efficient and less less expensive. You go for mediation, it gets resolved in 1 or 2 days, and it's very very non-expensive.
So you think the built-in mediation here would be
It'd be okay.
reasonable? Okay,
But
so,
don't agree on the arbitration. Because arbitration is usually very expensive, because you have to pay for the
Judge.
arbitrator. And they charge $750 per hour.
so on the listing agreement, I believe on our checklist, we have an ARB form. I don't know if Anna's here, she can speak up, but so that will become now only if the parties want to agree to arbitration. Because you have to actually check that form and bring it into the listing agreement. So what Peter
What
said,
was your question, Michelle? I'm sorry.
the ARB form, that's going to be not mandatory, but on the listing agreement, but if the parties want to agree to arbitration. Because Peter said it could be very, very costly and it may not be good for either party to agree to it.
Yeah, I think we have it on the sales side. We removed it from the listing side to have the arbitration document, if I'm correct, Michelle. You
Yeah.
decided to remove it from listing and it's only on the sales side and it's if applicable, correct?
Okay, great. Okay, I just want to make sure we had it that way because I didn't remember. So attorney fees, Peter can probably address this more. Reasonable attorney fees not to exceed 1,000. Well, 1,000 probably isn't going to get you much. Do you recommend that we amend this or leave it?
Yeah, well, you don't have to check it. I mean,
Just leave it?
just leave it. And,
Okay. So it defaults if there's any attorney fees that they collectively do not exceed $1,000, okay? Disclosures, there's some things that auto-populate, like the mold and dampness auto-populates, bed bugs. Megan's Law is right here. Let them look themselves so we don't look for them, okay? So they can look at Megan's Law database on their own.
Tenants.
The tenant can. Residential environmental hazard booklet. I usually check this and it's a big booklet, but I put it inside one of the kitchen cabinets because it explains a lot of things about asbestos, mold, all those kind of things. For me, I put this in the property. I give it to them. So that's up to you and your housing provider. Okay.
It has to be checked. It doesn't have to be checked, but it's ideal, right? To have it checked and make sure you have a booklet. Just to cover.
I like it, but that's going to be up to you. But I like it because it explains a lot of the hazardous materials. And I feel like it's a little bit more coverage for the housing provider. So for me, I will always provide it.
Perfect.
Okay. So agency confirmation is built in. So here you see the disclosure, if checked, the term of the agreement exceeds 1 year, and then a disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships is required, but please go ahead and check that if it does exceed a year, but also please make sure that you're providing it anyway. We want to have that agency disclosure. Okay. Okay. Now here is a box for tenant compensation to the broker. That can be checked if you have an agreement with them to pay. We're going to go over how to get paid on a residential lease. And right here, owner compensation to the brokerage. And upon execution of this agreement, owner agrees to pay compensation to a broker as specified in a separate written agreement. That can be on the listing agreement or the LCA. So I'm going to populate those and show them to you. So these are I just checked these because these auto-populate. Okay. So right here on 50, the premises is being managed by the owner. It defaults to the owner. We're not the property manager. Okay. So you can let that default unless they tell you that they have a property management firm that they want you to insert here, which would not be us. We're not property management. I just put a line. You can read this box. that we don't guarantee the condition, etc. And the tenant signs here, all their information goes there. Now, this is important. If there's a guarantor, like let's say it was a student and the housing provider wanted the parent to guarantee the lease, then you're going to check that and they're going to sign down here, okay? And generally for a guarantor, you're going to run a credit report, have an application, all the normal application requirements that you would have for a tenant, you're going to require from the guarantor as well. Okay, so the real estate broker's information is here. So I'm not going to go through the auto populates because I do want to take the time to get to the commission. Okay, so I'm going to check out of this and we're going to go to the commission. So there's these quick guides, by the way, that CAR puts out are fantastic. I love to look at these. So you see right here that the NAR settlement did not apply to lease or rental transactions. It applies to residential properties with 1 to 4 units. So let's see. So if you want to put a tenant agreement together, you're going to use TRBC, and I'm going to show you that. So CAR form TRBC, which is the tenant representation and broker compensation agreement to document the tenant's agreement to pay. And it also provides that the tenant will have the compensation obligation reduced if the agent receives compensation from the housing provider. So if you want to ask that the housing provider pay the commission, you're going to submit that on an LCA.
Yeah,
Okay.
this form is very similar to BRBC, and also the total commission you got cannot be more than what the tenants what the tenant want to give to the leasing to the tenant's agent.
Okay.
In other words, if the tenant's agent got permission to get 3% from the tenant, so the total commission, whether they can get it from the housing provider or the tenant, cannot be more than 3%.
Okay.
If that is what they.
If that's what they specified on this form.
Very similar to the BRBC.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so right here, D1 is where you're going to put the amount of commission in either A or B. Okay, so this is an important document because remember, the listing agreement for the tenant representing the housing provider only provides for their commission, not yours. So we need to make sure we're doing these forms. Okay, so let me drop down to the next one. The lease rental commission agreement, this is what you can fill out and send to the other broker to have it signed. And I'll show you right here. The housing provider would sign it that they're going to pay the tenant and the real estate broker. Okay, so this form you can fill out and send. Christine Fend had a commercial deal. And I told her, wow, this form says housing provider all over. And the commercial deal was on CAR forms. And I said, but it says housing provider, so I don't know. So she called the legal hotline and they said, even though it says housing provider, you can also use this on a commercial lease if you're using CAR forms. Okay. So I think they should amend that, but you know, maybe they'll do that later because like they said on that quick guide that it's a work in progress on this stuff because they don't know where the laws are going. So I want to ask the Zoom members, do you have any questions for Peter or me or on the forms?
I have some recommendations. When
Okay.
you're dealing with residential leases, you have to be very careful with the discrimination provision, you know, because it's very easy to get into problems because a lot of people out there are looking for
Easy money.
discriminations in terms of like race, sex, disability, or Section 8 in particular. You know, very, very, very particular. Section 8, you cannot refuse to lease it to Section 8. And so they will pretend that, oh, well, do you rent the premises to the Section 8? And then if you said no, then you have an instant lawsuit.
They have free legal for that too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're being an agent, you never say anything about leasing it or what you just say that, okay, well, I will present your the application to the landlord and let the landlord decide. That's all you have to say. Not more, not less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just go ahead and provide all your information and then let the landlord provide, you know.
the answer, yeah.
decide.
Does anybody online have any questions regarding leasing or anything they've ran into recently? Or confusion about avoiding any discriminatory statements or anything?
So does the leasing, when you're leasing for, let's say they want to lease for 3 years. How do you get paid for the 3 years?
You have to ask. Yeah.
You just, you have a commission agreement, right? So you just have to specify it for 3 years instead of 1 year.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's permissible.
Because if you look at D1 on that representation, it says blank percent of the total rent payments due under the lease. So if the lease was running for 3 years, you know, that covers that. So, and then I would also turn around and do that, the second form we showed you, the LCA, I would make sure that I had that signed by the other side, the housing provider, if that's the case for 3 years. Any other questions? Very quiet group today. Okay, so I guess that concludes our training this Friday. As we stated, we will be having a business planning. I'm gonna wait for, I think Doug is gone for a few more days.
No, it's back already.
Okay,
So
so
we can start working on it.
we'll start working on the business plan sometime next week, and we'll send out notices on that. So I hope you all have a good weekend, and thank you for attending the training.
Yeah, today's presentation is very good. It gives us step by step, you know, how to do a residential lease, and it's very valuable. So if you still want to come back and review it, just go to YouTube.
Yeah.
Have it recorded, and you know you can come back over and over again and just get yourself familiarized with the procedure, and that's all you need. That's all you need.
Yeah, and it's a great profit center for us. And not only that, we're meeting the owners of the property. So if they like you, you could get a listing, or if the tenants like you, they can ask you to find them a house to purchase. So it's a great profit center for everybody. All right.
Thank goodness for Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
You guys.
Bye-bye. Have a nice weekend.
Have a nice weekend.
Bye.